What if I told you that 3 simple phrases spoken by a dying man 2,000 years ago secretly rewrote the entire code of human civilization? Most people think they know what Jesus said on the cross, but they're missing the hidden genius behind each word. These weren't just final gasps of a religious figure. They were calculated psychological masterstrokes that would reshape how billions of humans think about forgiveness, abandonment, and victory. Today, we're decoding the 3 phrases that didn't just change Christianity, they changed the very DNA of human behavior. The truth will shock you. Here's what most people completely misunderstand about the first phrase Jesus spoke while dying. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Everyone thinks this was just a nice religious sentiment, a spiritual man being kind to his executioners. But that's where they're dead wrong. This wasn't kindness. This was the most revolutionary psychological warfare ever deployed against human nature itself. Think about it. For thousands of years, human societies operated on one simple principle: the revenge cycle. Someone hurts you, you hurt them back. It's tribal, it's instinctive. It's how every civilization before Jesus handled justice. Eye for an eye wasn't just a law, it was human nature encoded into social DNA. Revenge was the glue that held societies together through fear and retribution. But here's where it gets fascinating. Jesus wasn't just refusing to play the revenge game, he was hacking it entirely. He understood something that no leader before him had grasped. The person who breaks the revenge cycle first doesn't just win the game, they change the rules for everyone who comes after. Consider this. Jesus was being executed by the most powerful empire in human history. These weren't random criminals killing him. This was the Roman state, with all its machinery of oppression, making an example of him. The logical response: curse them, call down divine wrath, promise eternal punishment. That's what every revolutionary leader in history had done when faced with state execution. Instead, Jesus did something that sent shockwaves through the psychological foundations of civilization. He forgave his executioners while they were still driving nails through his hands. Not after they apologized, not after they realized their mistake, while they were actively torturing him to death. This wasn't just radical, it was psychologically impossible according to everything humans knew about justice and human nature. And that's exactly why it worked. Here's the psychological genius that history missed. Jesus wasn't just demonstrating forgiveness, he was weaponizing it. He understood that forgiveness, deployed at the moment of maximum injustice, creates a cognitive dissonance so powerful, it literally reprograms the human brain. Let me break down what actually happened in the minds of everyone watching. The Roman soldiers expected resistance, cursing, maybe pleading. They'd crucified thousands before. They knew the script. Condemned men either beg for mercy or curse their killers. This predictable response confirms the executioner's power and justifies their actions. It keeps the revenge cycle running smoothly. But forgiveness? Forgiveness at the moment of execution creates what psychologists now call moral injury in the perpetrator. Suddenly, the person you're killing is demonstrating a moral superiority that exposes your own moral bankruptcy. You can't fight forgiveness with more violence. It just makes you look more evil by comparison. Historical records show that some of the Roman centurions present at the crucifixion later converted to Christianity. Think about that. These were professional killers who spent their careers enforcing Roman dominance through fear. Yet something about Jesus' response broke them psychologically. But here's where it gets even more strategic. Jesus added a crucial phrase, "for they know not what they do." This wasn't just forgiveness, it was a psychological escape hatch. He was giving his executioners a way to live with themselves afterward. Instead of making them monsters, he made them victims of their own ignorance. This is where the genius reveals itself. Jesus understood that true power isn't the ability to destroy your enemies. It's the ability to transform them into allies. By forgiving them and providing psychological cover for their actions, he was offering them a path to redemption that didn't require him to survive. The Roman Empire had conquered the world through superior military force, but they'd never encountered a weapon like strategic forgiveness. You can crucify a rebel, but how do you crucify someone who forgives you for crucifying them? The very act of execution becomes a demonstration of the victim's moral superiority. Within 300 years, this forgiveness strategy had conquered the Roman Empire from within. The descendants of Jesus' executioners became the protectors of his message. The revenge cycle that had powered human civilization for millennia was broken by one man's refusal to participate in it. Think of the revenge cycle like a tennis match from hell. For thousands of years, humanity played this game where every shot had to be returned with equal or greater force. Someone hits you, you hit back harder. Someone betrays you, you betray them worse. Back and forth, escalating forever. Jesus didn't just refuse to return the shot. He caught the ball and handed it back with a smile. Imagine your opponent serves you a 100-mile-per-hour fastball aimed at your head, and instead of ducking or hitting back, you catch it and say, "Nice shot, want to grab lunch?" The psychological impact is devastating. Your opponent suddenly realizes they've been playing a completely different game than you. They're playing tennis. You're playing something else entirely. Something they've never encountered and don't know how to counter. This is exactly what happened at the crucifixion. Rome served Jesus the ultimate power shot. State execution, the most humiliating death imaginable. Jesus caught it and responded with forgiveness. The Romans suddenly found themselves in a game they didn't understand, using rules they'd never encountered. But here's the brilliant part. Jesus didn't just break the rules for himself. He created a new game that anyone could play. Every person who witnessed or heard about this moment suddenly had access to a superpower they'd never imagined. The ability to stop any conflict dead in its tracks through strategic forgiveness. This wasn't just about being nice. This was about understanding that the person who refuses to escalate conflict doesn't lose power. They transcend the entire system that everyone else is trapped in. They become ungovernable, unconquerable, because they're playing by different rules. And that's how one man's refusal to play the revenge game ended up rewriting the psychological operating system of human civilization. If this is exploding your head, leave your like so more people can discover these hidden truths. But wait, because the second case is even more shocking. Now, let's decode the second phrase that secretly rewrote human psychology. My God, why have you forsaken me? Most people think this was Jesus having a crisis of faith, a moment of doubt when the pain became too much. Religious scholars spend centuries debating whether this shows Jesus' humanity or reveals some theological crisis. But they're all missing the point entirely. This wasn't doubt. This was the most psychologically sophisticated manipulation of human empathy ever deployed. Jesus wasn't questioning God. He was giving humanity permission to question everything. Here's what no one talks about. For thousands of years, human suffering had one explanation. You deserved it. Got sick? You must have angered the gods. Lost your family? You weren't faithful enough. Faced injustice? You must have done something wrong. This wasn't just religious thinking. This was how humans psychologically protected themselves from the terrifying randomness of existence. The idea that good people suffer for no reason was too dangerous for ancient societies to accept. It would mean that being moral, following the rules, and worshipping the gods might not protect you. That level of uncertainty would cause civilizations to collapse under the weight of existential terror. So instead, every culture developed the same psychological defense mechanism: suffering equals punishment. If you're suffering, you must deserve it somehow. This kept people believing that good behavior would protect them, and that the universe operated on some kind of fair cosmic justice system. But Jesus was facing the ultimate contradiction to this worldview. Here was someone that even his enemies acknowledged was innocent, suffering the most brutal death imaginable. If the suffering equals punishment equation was true, then either Jesus deserved crucifixion, or the entire moral framework of human civilization was built on a lie. By crying out, "Why have you forsaken me?" Jesus wasn't expressing doubt. He was forcing humanity to confront the possibility that innocent people suffer, that the universe might not be fair, and that the old explanations for why bad things happen might be completely wrong. This question would eventually shatter every simplistic explanation for human suffering and force humanity to develop more sophisticated ways of understanding pain, injustice, and meaning. It was the beginning of the end for humanity's childish relationship with suffering. Here's the psychological masterstroke hidden in that cry of abandonment. Jesus was modeling vulnerability as a source of power. For the first time in human history, a leader was demonstrating that acknowledging pain and confusion didn't make you weak. It made you relatable to every human being who had ever suffered. Think about every powerful leader before Jesus. Kings, emperors, military commanders, they all projected invincibility. They hid their pain, masked their doubts, and pretended that power meant never showing weakness. The moment a leader appeared vulnerable, their authority crumbled. But Jesus flipped this equation entirely. By expressing his anguish publicly, he wasn't losing authority. He was gaining it. Every person watching suddenly realized that this man understood exactly what they felt in their darkest moments. He wasn't above human suffering. He was right in the middle of it with them. This created what psychologists now call authentic connection. When someone powerful admits they're struggling with the same things you struggle with, you don't lose respect for them. You follow them more devotedly because they understand your experience. But here's where it gets even more strategic. Jesus wasn't just expressing any emotion. He was expressing the one emotion that every human being has felt but never been allowed to voice. The feeling that maybe God, the universe, or life itself has abandoned them. For thousands of years, people suffered in silence because expressing doubt about divine justice was blasphemy. You couldn't question why bad things happened to good people because questioning implied that God might be unfair or absent. This forced humans to internalize their deepest pain and confusion, creating psychological wounds that never healed. By screaming, "Why have you forsaken me?" in front of everyone, Jesus was giving humanity permission to ask the questions they'd never been allowed to ask. He was saying that doubt isn't the opposite of faith. It's a natural human response to inexplicable suffering. The psychological impact was revolutionary. Suddenly, humans could acknowledge their pain without being accused of lacking faith. They could question divine justice without being branded as heretics. They could admit that sometimes life doesn't make sense without having to pretend they understood some cosmic plan. This single phrase opened the door to authentic human emotional expression in a way that had never existed before. It validated the universal human experience of feeling abandoned during suffering and transformed that feeling from something shameful into something sacred. Imagine if every leader throughout history had worn a perfect mask, never showing fear, pain, or confusion. Then suddenly, in the moment of ultimate crisis, one leader removes their mask and reveals that they feel exactly the same terror and confusion that everyone else feels. That's not weakness. That's the most powerful connection you can make with another human being. It's like being in a room full of people pretending they're not afraid during an earthquake. And then one person says, "I'm terrified, and I don't understand what's happening." Suddenly, everyone realizes they're not alone in their fear. Jesus' cry of abandonment was like that moment of brutal honesty. For the first time, someone in ultimate authority was admitting that they felt abandoned, confused, and in pain. But instead of destroying his credibility, it made him infinitely more trustworthy because he was telling the truth about the human experience. Think of it like this. Before Jesus, suffering was like a disease everyone had, but no one was allowed to discuss. People suffered in isolation, thinking they were the only ones who felt abandoned by God or confused by injustice. They had to pretend that everything made sense when nothing made sense. Jesus turned suffering into a shared experience. He said essentially, "I'm supposed to be God's son, and even I don't understand why this is happening." That gave everyone permission to admit their own confusion without feeling like spiritual failures. This wasn't just about emotional support. It was about psychological liberation. Humans could finally stop pretending they understood divine justice and start focusing on how to support each other through inexplicable pain. Instead of wasting energy defending God's reputation, they could invest that energy in actually helping people suffer less. The result was a complete transformation in how humans processed trauma, loss, and injustice. Suffering went from being a private shame to being a universal human experience that created connection rather than isolation. And subscribe now, because the third case coming next will completely change your perspective on human nature. The third phrase Jesus spoke on the cross is the most misunderstood victory declaration in human history. It is finished. Everyone thinks this was Jesus announcing his death, a simple statement that his life was ending. But that interpretation misses the psychological earthquake these two words triggered across human consciousness. Here's what most people don't realize. "It is finished" wasn't about Jesus's life ending. It was about humanity's old operating system being permanently deleted. For thousands of years, human civilization had been running on one fundamental program: the belief that death was the ultimate defeat, that being killed by your enemies meant they had won and you had lost. Every empire, every army, every power structure in human history depended on this equation. Kill your enemies, or own victory achieved. The Romans perfected this formula. They crucified rebels not just to eliminate them, but to send a clear message that resistance was futile. Death meant defeat, and defeat meant your cause died with you. But Jesus understood something that would shatter this psychological framework forever. What if death wasn't defeat? What if being killed could actually be victory? What if the person dying could win by the very act of dying? This concept was so alien to human thinking that it took centuries for people to fully grasp its implications. Jesus wasn't saying, "My life is finished." He was announcing, "The old game is finished." The rules that had governed human power dynamics for millennia were being rewritten in real time. Consider the psychological impossibility of what Jesus was claiming. He was hanging on a cross, dying the most humiliating death the Roman Empire could devise, and declaring victory. By every measure that had ever mattered in human history, he was experiencing total defeat. His enemies had captured him, tortured him, and were publicly executing him as a warning to anyone who might follow his example. Yet at the moment of maximum defeat, Jesus announced that he had won. This wasn't delusion or religious fantasy. This was a complete redefinition of what victory could mean. He was saying that sometimes the only way to win is to lose so spectacularly that your loss exposes the moral bankruptcy of everyone who thinks they've defeated you. Here's the psychological revolution hidden in "It is finished." Jesus had figured out how to transform martyrdom from a failure into a strategy. He understood that in certain circumstances, letting your enemies kill you is the most powerful weapon you can deploy against them. Think about the impossible position Jesus put the Romans in. They were experts at using death as a tool of control. Crucify enough rebels and rebellion stops. Make death terrifying enough and people submit rather than resist. For centuries, this formula had built and maintained the largest empire in human history. But Jesus turned their own weapon against them. By declaring victory at the moment of death, he transformed crucifixion from a symbol of Roman power into a symbol of Roman moral failure. Every time someone looked at a cross after Jesus, they wouldn't see Roman authority. They'd see evidence that Rome killed innocent people. The genius of "it is finished" was that it reframed the entire narrative. Instead of Rome defeated another rebel, the story became Rome murdered an innocent man who forgave them while they killed him and declared victory through his own death. This narrative didn't just survive Jesus' execution, it grew stronger because of it. But here's where the psychological manipulation reaches its peak. Jesus connected all three phrases into one devastating argument against the power structures of his time. First, he demonstrated that forgiveness could break the revenge cycle that empires depended on. Second, he showed that leaders could be vulnerable and still maintain authority. Third, he proved that death could be victory if it exposed the moral emptiness of those doing the killing. These three concepts together created a psychological framework that made traditional power structures literally unworkable. How do you control people who forgive instead of seeking revenge? How do you intimidate people who see vulnerability as strength? How do you threaten people who believe that dying for their principles is the ultimate victory? The Romans discovered they couldn't. Within 300 years, the empire that killed Jesus had converted to his philosophy. The very people who perfected crucifixion as a tool of terror had transformed it into a symbol of hope. The power structure that seemed unbeatable had been conquered by someone who won by letting them kill him. This wasn't just religious transformation, it was the psychological evolution of human consciousness itself. The idea that moral authority could trump military power, that losing could be winning, and that love could conquer hate had never existed in human thinking before Jesus modeled it on the cross. Picture the ultimate chess match where your opponent has all the powerful pieces, queens, rooks, knights, and you're down to just a king. In normal chess, you'd resign because defeat is inevitable. But Jesus discovered a completely different game hidden inside chess. What if the goal wasn't to protect your king, but to sacrifice him in a way that proves your opponent is a cheater? That's exactly what "it is finished" accomplished. Rome had all the power pieces, armies, laws, execution methods, political control. Jesus was down to just himself. But instead of trying to win the power game, he sacrificed himself in a way that exposed the entire game as morally bankrupt. When Jesus declared, "It is finished," he wasn't saying, "I'm done playing." He was announcing, "I just changed the rules of the game permanently." Suddenly, winning wasn't about who had more power. It was about who had more moral authority, and you can't build moral authority by killing innocent people. Think of it like this. Imagine a boxing match where one fighter keeps hitting below the belt using brass knuckles and bribing the referee. The clean fighter could try to cheat back, but instead, he lets himself get beaten while pointing out every illegal move to the crowd. Eventually, everyone realizes they're not watching a boxing match, they're watching a mugging. That's what Jesus did to the Roman Empire. He let them crucify him while demonstrating that crucifixion was morally indefensible. The crowd watching didn't see Roman justice in action. They saw Roman brutality exposed. The very act of killing Jesus became evidence against everything Rome claimed to represent. "It is finished" was Jesus announcing that the old game, where power equals victory, was over. He'd introduced a new game, where moral authority trumps military might, where character matters more than control, and where losing with integrity beats winning through corruption. This psychological shift didn't just change Christianity, it revolutionized human civilization. The idea that you could win by losing became the foundation for every successful nonviolent resistance movement in history. 3 phrases, 3 psychological revolutions, 3 strategic masterstrokes that rewrote the source code of human civilization. Jesus didn't just die on that cross. He hacked humanity's operating system and installed a completely new program. Forgiveness over revenge, vulnerability as strength, victory through sacrifice. These weren't just religious ideas, they were psychological weapons that conquered the greatest empire in history without firing a single shot. If these 3 cases exploded your mind, smash the like button and subscribe to never miss our next mysteries. Tell us in the comments, which revelation surprised you most? Hit the bell so the algorithm doesn't lie to you. If you know someone who needs to see this, share it, because these truths need to be known. This content presents speculative psychological analysis based on publicly available historical records, not clinical diagnosis. The interpretations offered represent one analytical perspective and should not substitute formal religious or historical education. This content presents speculative psychological analysis based on publicly available historical records, not clinical diagnosis. The interpretations offered represent one analytical perspective and should not substitute formal religious or historical education.